The following message is brought to you by Mike Koplitz. He is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church and an ordained Messianic rabbi. The narrative we are taking a look at here is very short. In fact, it's only 2 verses. This is from Luke chapter 9, verses 43 to 45. Jesus had just performed miracles, and people were astonished to see what happened. The people of Jesus' day in the Galilee and Judea needed to see signs and miracles to believe. Therefore, Jesus gave them signs and miracles. Then we have this small transition from a discussion of healing to a discussion of discipleship. The bridge here is to understand that becoming a disciple of Jesus, especially in the early years of Christianity, may bring you greatness, but it also may bring you the sorrow of a painful death. I would rather not concentrate on that. Rather, I would rather talk about that which is hidden from us today. The verses also say that the disciples did not understand. Therefore, the hidden meaning of Jesus' death and resurrection was hidden from them. When I look at the church today, have we placed a veil over the true meaning of Jesus' message? Let's first look at the activity of the church in general. Jesus and his disciples were poor and very common people of the day. Well, of course, Jesus was the Messiah, so he wasn't the common one, but the disciples were common people. They lacked both money and fame. They were common people of the land. Furthermore, they created the first, what we would come to call churches, or should I say communities of believers. Yes, Paul tells us there were some rich people in those communities, but most of them were poor common people who were just trying to survive. In the world, there are definitely church communities that are destitute and are struggling. What I found interesting when I took a trip to northern Mexico to study the church is that the poor churches seem to have more spirituality and trust in God. Perhaps it's because they had so little. They had a dependency on God to provide everything they needed. I was sitting in a house when there was a knock at the door, and a young girl was there asking the lady of the house if she had a tomato that she could lend to her neighbor. The lady of the house opened her refrigerator and she had 1 tomato. If God was sending me a message, it was pretty clear. That woman gave that last piece of food from her refrigerator to the young girl that she could take it home for her mom to cook dinner. My question to the lady of the house was, "So what are you going to have for dinner?" Her answer was, "God will provide." I found out in Mexico, now this was in 2001, that even though it was a payday, you may not have gotten paid. It was not uncommon for that to happen. What happened if her husband came home without a paycheck? They can't buy food without money. With the possibility of going hungry that day, the family was not concerned because they believed God would provide. At that moment, I wondered if it was because they had so little that they had a bigger dependence on God. There were 25 seminary students in that group with me, and none of us had a worry about what we were going to have for dinner that night. We all had money and credit cards. Therefore, we knew we were going to have something. How would it be to live without that net? Would a reduction in material possessions lead to increased reliance on God? What was the veil that was over the disciples' eyes that they could not understand that Jesus, as the Messiah, a prophet of God, was going to be captured and killed when he got to Jerusalem? Jesus said to them that they didn't understand what was going on. It wouldn't be until the resurrection they fully grasped the situation. Is there something that's preventing you from truly seeing what Jesus wants us to do in life? Do you have a veil over your head and covering your eyes that you cannot see what it's all about? When I think about church people who say that they love Jesus and they treat each other extremely poorly, which happens in church all the time, let's admit it, I begin to wonder, do they understand the meaning of Christ's message? In other words, they have placed a veil over themselves so that they do not fully understand what the message of love and grace in Christ is all about. If they did, then they would not act the way they do to their fellow disciples of Christ. I think the general church has the same veil over it. When I sat in the Mexican church on a Sunday that had a large hole in the roof, yet I saw them collect money to send to the Vatican instead of fixing their roof, I came to the conclusion that the Vatican had a veil hovering over it that prevented them from seeing the true meaning of Jesus. Instead of collecting money from this small, poor church, they should have sent money to the church so they could fix the roof. If it rained on Sunday, they couldn't hold worship because their church would get flooded. I was appointed to a church where the people threw a major fit when some charity money went to help a fellow denominational church fix its leaking roof. I was astonished that people in the church were angry about helping other people in another church of the same denomination. However, they would very freely give money to the food bank and to people they did not know. So the veil that the church had was caring about other Christians. They thought it was more important to give money out to an organization to help someone who they did not know rather than helping their fellow Christians. The lesson here for us as individuals is, do we have a veil over our eyes that is preventing us from truly seeing and acting the way Jesus did in his life? If you think you have a veil, there is an easy way to get rid of the veil. Read the Gospels and imitate the life of Christ. Every one of us probably has a veil over some aspect of our lives that is in contradiction to the Bible. Most likely we don't even know it, because if we did, I'm sure we would want to fix it. Therefore, I urge you to think about the way you act and the way you talk to people and determine if this is the way Jesus would talk and the way Jesus would act. If the answer is no, Jesus would not do this, then you need to change your behavior and your attitude and the way you do things so that you can come into compliance with Jesus' way. When we do that, we are truly disciples of Jesus Christ, not just in words, but in actions. Thank you for listening to this message. I hope it blesses you in some way. And as always, Shalom.